Hi, I'm Femi OK.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
Today, part 2 of our conversation on sexual harassment in the workplace. Recent news stories about the issue has brought it back to the forefront, but it's one that never really goes away.
That's right. The conversation about sexual harassment may go quiet every now and then, but it stays pretty loud on social media, around dozens of hashtags that have been used for years. Let's just take a look at a few. We covered My Dress, My Choice back in 2014. The hashtag came out of Kenya and shined a light on sexual harassment and victim blaming. Unsafe at Uni comes out of the UK, where students shared their experiences with sexual assault on campuses. The hashtag has been in the news these days following a Guardian investigation on harassment at universities in the UK. We've also been keeping an eye on Astro-SH and Bio-SH. Now, those are two hashtags that scientists use to highlight sexual harassment in labs and academia.
In the United States, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission defines sexual harassment as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. And it's global. It's abusive power that can be used on someone based on their gender, race, or sexual orientation that can result in an adverse employment decision, like the victim being fired or demoted. According to the United Nations, between 40 and 50% of women in European Union countries experience unwanted sexual advances, physical contact, or other forms of sexual harassment at work. In Brazil, sexual harassment can be a crime for the employee who commits it, but only a civil matter for the employer. Sexual harassment in India is illegal, but a recent study found that 70% of working women don't report incidents for fear of repercussion. And statistically, members of the LGBT community are one of the most discriminated demographics in workplaces around the world, facing harassment, abuse, underemployment, and joblessness. Today, we'll hear more from our panel on their experiences. So with us, we have Emily Martin. She's General Counsel and Vice President for Workplace Justice at the National Women's Law Center. Oriana Castro Ramirez is a former copywriter in Bogota, Colombia. Bissi Alimi is an LGBTQ activist and director of the Bissi Alimi Foundation. Rashima Quatra is the communications officer at Outright International. That's a non-governmental organization that addresses human rights violations in the LGBTQ community. And Umberto Carollo is the managing director at White Ribbon Canada. His organization is a movement of men and boys working to end violence against women and girls. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this discussion. Emily, worst case scenario for reporting sexual harassment at work that you've ever heard of?
Well, I guess the worst case scenario is simply that you get fired immediately and that your name is trashed in your industry and you can't get another job. And certainly women have the realistic fear of that happening, even though in the United States that's clearly illegal. But the fear of that sort of retaliation is what keeps 80% of women from ever making a complaint of sexual harassment formally when they experience it.
I want to add something to it. In Colombia, it's going on right now. My article went live 2 weeks ago, and I've received over 20 cases of a lot of women that have been harassed by high-profile men in the industry. But they're too afraid, even now that they're talking about it, even now they're really afraid to come out and denounce.
Umberto, when you are helping men and boys to actually be allies to women and girls in terms of harassment, are they important in terms of spotting when it's happening and then reporting it? What can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So in addition to the leadership role that men can play in the workplace in terms of identifying this issue, prioritizing and addressing, there is a significant role and responsibility for male colleagues to intervene, to speak up, to challenge other male colleagues who are not behaving properly or are not treating other colleagues properly. So that is something that we at White Ribbon and organizations like Men Engage Global are working very hard on to help workplaces understand how to educate the male workforce, how to encourage male employees to speak out, to support women who have experienced sexual harassment, how to be allies to members of the LGBTQI communities, and how to make sure that they're playing a positive role in creating safe and inclusive workplaces, because this is an issue that is impacting us as well. We, the vast majority of men, don't believe in these kinds of behaviors, but many of them remain silent in the workplace or play along because they don't know what to do, how to intervene. They don't have the information, the tools. So organizations like White Ribbon are working with employers to help the workforce understand first how to identify these behaviors, and
How do
then
you identify
how to
Umberto?
intervene.
Umberto, how do you identify it?
It's by understanding, first of all, the types of behaviors that constitute sexual harassment. So the jokes, the leering, the inappropriate touching, the threatening messages, the uninvited invitations, the following on social media with inappropriate texts or
Is it just
images.
me, or is that just me because I'm a woman? It's like, why would that need to be identified? Because that's obnoxious.
Because not everybody understands that those behaviors are harassing.
Busy? Go ahead, Busy.
I know you're doing this with all good intention, but the reality goes back to one of the biggest things that we are talking about, because what you are trying to do is to unconsciously excuse bad behaviors from men and trying to feel that, they have to go to a school to learn this. I will share one experience I had, and I shared this on Facebook about 3 weeks ago. I finished in the gym, and I was in the gym, I was changing to leave, and a guy brought out his mobile phone and was showing the picture of his girlfriend to his friends in a male locker room, and they were passing around this picture of this girl that she had sent to him naked, and this happened to be his girlfriends, and these guys were laughing, but I couldn't take it, and the part of me just went to this guy and said, you're disrespecting this woman,
for sharing
you're
that
disrespecting
story.
yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, and the point is to help that person's friend understand that is inappropriate,
But they know,
and help them understand how to respond. They know in some
They are laughing. They
absolutely in
always
some
laugh.
cases they know, but they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to do it safely and
Is it that they don't know how to
effectively, and
respond,
that's
or
what
is
we
it that
have to
is
work
just the
on.
culture? It is a culture. It is
And
acceptable.
I
Yes.
think
that
it's
this
also
happens.
because
I
they've
have to do
been,
it as well.
especially here in
And we have to
Colombia,
break
Oriana
that
is back.
culture.
Let's hear her while we have her. Oriana, what were you saying?
especially, I heard what you said, and I agree completely. Especially here in Colombia, there's a big macho community. You have to be the man in every situation, and I think in some way not as powerful as we and women feel it. They are victims too, because they have to play a role even if they're not like that. They have to laugh or be quiet just to be accepted. And when you don't get a clear culture of how to behave in your environment, in your work environment, you obviously are going to continue to laugh and to not speak up when a girl is being harassed or a girl is being treated badly.
I
So
think the issue about workplace culture
yes.
and cultures of masculinity really goes to the question you raised about why do you have to tell somebody that this is inappropriate workplace behavior.
Exactly.
In some companies, in some workplaces, especially workplaces that traditionally have been all male or almost all male, there's a workplace culture of bondings about degrading women, that's part of the conversation, that's part of the way that the men on the factory floor talk to each other. And as more and more women break into these traditionally male jobs, it is necessary and appropriate to say that culture is not okay. That culture is having really toxic consequences for the woman on the shop floor next to you.
Which is why we're seeing tweets like this. This is Sammy, and Rashima, I'll give this to you. Sammy on Twitter says, educating the staff about what is considered sexual harassment constantly should be a priority. I actually want to share a story where that didn't happen. This is in the US, showing that this is really a global conversation. We got a video comment from someone named Maureen, and Maureen works in New Jersey. She's a multimedia journalist, and here's what happened to her.
I once had a male supervisor who was incapable of holding a conversation with me or any of our female colleagues without staring at our chests the entire time. I complained to his supervisor, with whom I worked closely as well, and he told me, well, if you've got boobs, people are going to look. Try covering your chest with a notebook. I escalated it to human resources, and nothing ever happened, and I left that job shortly thereafter.
So Rashima, what should have happened in that instance?
Well, of course, something should have happened in regards to human resources. They should have taken this up. They should have made sure that the individual who had experienced sexual harassment or should have been valued, and it should have been indicated that this type of behavior is not appropriate and not allowed at the workplace. But we find that this doesn't happen in a lot of circumstances because the individual, the interlocutor, or the HR individual might not be themselves educated about what is considered sexual harassment and what isn't. And we see these, just to caveat just a little bit, but we see that individuals and HR people are specifically not educated on what sexual harassment is based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And we don't have policies that are inclusive of what it means to be sexually harassed because of your sexual orientation.
We're trying to excuse these things, though, right? I think we're trying to, if I'm standing in front of you and you are looking right at my breast instead of looking into my eyes to talk to me, I don't need to give you the ABC of sexual harassment for you to know that you are sexually objectifying me. These are simple rules. We don't need to go to school to learn the nitty-gritty of sexual harassment.
I disagree. I think we do.
Yeah, I agree. I won't continue speaking out about your behind every time you get up to the bathroom. And I'm sorry, because especially for me, every time I told them stop, or many times I tried to tell them to stop because I felt uncomfortable, and they would laugh it off. So I didn't know what to do.
Absolutely. I think in an ideal world, I think it would be great for everybody to know exactly what kinds of behaviors are respectful and constitute sexual harassment. But that is not the case. I think from a very young age, boys are taught to behave towards women in certain ways and towards other boys in certain ways. And let's not forget that our education system is severely lacking when it comes to real education about these issues. So we have generations of young people who grow up to become adults and don't understand that these behaviors have that kind of impact on other individuals.
Bissy, so I'm registering Bissy's disagreement. Ariana, what did you want to ask?
I wanted to add something, because if we wait for that generation to grow up, it's going to take a lot of time. We are dealing with these issues right now. And that's why I think we have to start discussing about how we're going to change especially men's behavior towards women in work environments. And I think that we have to teach them to be leaders too, because they are too victims of man status or manpower. And also we
Ariana,
have
if you
to
could go back, Ariana, to the person who harassed you before you left your job, what would you say to that person? How would you teach that person?
I would tell him to get help or get some counseling, because I'm not the only woman. I'm not the only woman here harassed, and I've received 5 cases from that same person. So we all agree that he should go and get some advice,
right?
Because I don't want to ruin his life. It's just that he learns how to behave and really how to continue to exploit his talent without taking advantage from another girl.
You think he needs proper professional counselling. Let me just take a pause for a moment, because I want to check in with Malika.
Well, people online are picking up on a point that, Umberto, that you raised a little bit earlier, noting that the educational system needs a little bit of work. People online are saying that's true, but the legislative system around the world also needs some work. So take a look at this headline on my laptop here. We mentioned this at the top of the show. We spoke to the person who did this study, Zamir Nathani from the Indian National Bar Association. He conducted this study that found that 70% of women in India didn't file complaints. But he says the Indian National Bar Association is calling on companies to do more to help them, even though we got a video comment from someone else out of India who says that may be good, and there is legislation that is progressive out there that is good, and yet. Have a listen to what Nandita told us.
In India, the sexual harassment of women at workplace law was enacted in 2013, but despite having such a progressive law, a large majority of women at workplace are still regularly subjected to sexual harassment.
So, Emily, even with laws that are progressive, that are combating this, that doesn't mean that it actually trickles down or translates into making sure it doesn't happen in individual workplaces.
Well, legal protections are definitely key, and I'm glad we're talking about that, because one of the things we haven't talked about is if the culture of your workplace is not responding and the people are not listening and really overt stuff is happening, the court system is a way to affect change. That being said, it's hard for individual women to stand up and say this happened to me and it was illegal. It's hard for a lot of reasons, because they fear retaliation, because it may be expensive to get an attorney, because if they're still working for their employer, it's very difficult to sue the company that you're working for. So for all those reasons, it's really also important to have affirmative government enforcement efforts, so that it's not just on the backs of individual women to stand up, so that federal agencies, state agencies are undertaking real investigations and taking some of the burden off individual women's shoulders. And it's also really helpful and valuable when women share their stories and discover it didn't just happen to them, it happened to other women they were working side by side with.
I did that once at somewhere. Oriana, it's interesting because I think we have similar experiences. I did that with a place that I worked in, and I thought I was the only person, and unfortunately, I wasn't the only person. There were many, many, many of us, and none of us said a single thing.
I think a lot of people who experience sexual harassment think, maybe I caused this in some way. I gave off the wrong message, I did something. And when you hear, actually, no, this was a pattern, it happened over and over again, it changes people's mindset in a way which makes it much easier to stand up and fight back. And it's easier when you have people with you.
To put in place workplace training programs, because when there is strong legislation behind these issues, as is in the case of Ontario, by the way, speaking of solutions, our provincial government passed a law recently that requires employers to provide training to their workforce on matters of domestic violence and sexual harassment in the workplace.
That's
but
amazing.
Laws and policies are not sufficient. We have to go beyond that. We have to then put a training program in place so that those policies can be brought to life.
Even in the
and it's
law,
not,
because
it's not just in terms of the...
Ariana, hold tight for a moment. Let me just hear. What's lesson 1 in your program? You have, let's say, we have people who've worked with Oriana. They're in lesson 1 of your program, Umberto. Where do you start?
Well, we start, first of all, by helping everybody understand what is sexual harassment, what is an acceptable behavior. We talk about how these behaviors affect the workplace in various ways through in-person interactions or interactions through social media, for example. And then we talk about what is the role of the bystander, what is the role of the perpetrator, what are the rights for the person that is experiencing
What is the role of the bystander,
harassment.
Umberto? Give us one clear example of a bystander and their role, so someone who's watching can go away and they've learned something.
That the role of the bystander is to, first of all, speak up and intervene and say, this is not right, this is not acceptable, please stop this behavior. And then they can also check in with the person who is experiencing to make sure that they're okay, to see if they need support, to see if the bystander can help the person make a report and act as a witness. Those are some very simple things that people can do.
So Umberto, do you know what the vibe I'm getting from Bissy is? He's not.
The role of the bystander.
Go ahead. Bissy, please go ahead.
I think one of the role of the bystander is to be the initiator of reporting this incident to the HR, Because one of the problems that we have when it comes to sexual harassment is that the burden of proof is on the victim. And until this is shifted, we're going to have problems with people reporting.
I
Because
think
when
we
you
have to
report
be
sexual
careful
harassment,
about
you
that
have to
because
prove.
not every person who experiences sexual harassment is willing to report, and you would know in the case of, for example,
Because you're not willing
an
to report
LGBT person, they're
because the
not
burden of proof
not
is on
always
you.
free
You
to
have to
report.
prove.
So
You
the
have to prove
bystander
that you've been sexually harassed.
should always check in with the person who's experiencing that behavior to make sure that they're okay with a report being made, and
No,
the
but I
report
think
is best
you
made
don't
by the
have
person
to
who
you don't have
experienced
to
the
link.
behavior with the
No, you don't
support
have to
of the
link the
bystander.
report. You don't have to link the report to the person. You can link the report that you have witnessed a case of sexual harassment without even mentioning them, just in case the case comes up. You are ready to stand as a victim, as a witness, sorry, because one of the biggest problems that we have also is that a lot of men that have witnessed sexual harassment refuse to stand up as witness against other men. And that is when I talked about men always having the back of men, even when they know
Yes,
that it is wrong. They
I'd like
refuse
to
to
also
stand up.
bring
I
it
think
back
more
to
men
policies
need to
for a
stand
moment.
up and
that's
be witness.
why it's
That's
so
what's going
important
on
that
right now.
Guest, let me just give me a moment. Give me a moment. Yeah, Rashima.
I'd just like to touch base on policies for a minute. And, you know, we keep bringing it back to this point, which is if there aren't inclusive policies, then why would people come out if they don't have protections? I think in the federal description of what you read, Malika, at the beginning, I think on what sexual harassment, and it made it very clear that sexual harassment, the victim or the perpetrator has to be a man or a woman. What if you exist outside of that binary and you don't identify as being a man or a woman? Does that mean that that what you face in the workplace is not considered sexual harassment and that you're not protected under these policies? You know, we have to have legislation, you know, at the federal level, at the state level. Currently, only 19 states in the United States protect against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. But we have to have sexual harassment laws that are completely inclusive of the spectrum. And until and unless we don't have
laws,
So, guess you're all speaking at the same time. So, I'm just going to ask you to take a pause, Malika.
I hope, because you said that we need laws at the federal level, I want to play a video comment we got from an attorney out of Trinidad and Tobago. This is Roberta.
Sexual harassment in the workplace and indeed on our streets is very much a feature of the lives of too many Caribbean women and girls. Yet very few countries have legislation which defines sexual harassment as a civil wrong, which defines sexual harassment as an abuse of power, and which defines sexual harassment as a manifestation or expression of gender inequality and sex discrimination, which is what it is. We need legislation that provides women with remedies when they experience harassment in the workplace. We need legislation that stops toxic and offensive behavior in the workplace. And I think that's what this advocacy all across the Caribbean is calling for, more state accountability.
All right, so guess we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask you to be extremely succinct. Your takeaway from somebody who is suffering from sexual harassment or a harasser. You decide, you take your pick. Oriana, what is your one piece of advice in a sentence? What would it be?
Tell everyone you trust and who know you.
All right.
Don't try to convince, but just speak up.
Tell everyone. Bissy, your piece of advice for the harasser or the harassed?
You're not alone. It's happening to so many people. Your ability to speak up will be saving somebody, so don't keep quiet.
Umberto.
Well, my message would be to the bystander and to all the men out there. This is an important issue. Speak up, intervene, believe people's experiences, get involved with White Ribbon, with Men Engage, and do your part to make a difference.
Rashima, your sentence is what? Your one sentence for your advice, your takeaway for this show is what?
Seek justice, seek redress. You know, don't be afraid. You do have a lot of people supporting you and being behind you.
Emily.
The law is on your side. Use that as a tool to empower yourself here.
All right, 5 very wise guests. Thank you so much for talking to us about harassment, sexual harassment around the world. Our conversation continues at #AJStream. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.